The first time I realized my parents had favorites, I tried to convince myself it was just in my head. After all, families sometimes dote more on one child than another. But that illusion shattered the day they handed my sister, Emily, a check for $30,000 for her wedding. I had walked into the living room that morning, thinking we were just going to celebrate her engagement with champagne and smiles. What I hadn't anticipated was the blatant demonstration of inequality. There she was, twirling in her new engagement ring, her eyes sparkling with excitement. And there they were, Mom and Dad grinning like conspirators, handing her the check as if it were some kind of crown jewel. "This is for your big day, sweetie. We want everything to be perfect," my mother said, her voice thick with pride. I forced a smile, clapping along with everyone else, but inside a storm was brewing. Because the truth was, I had never received a dime for anything from them. Not for college tuition, not for my first apartment, not even for the braces that made me hide my smile for years. I had worked, struggled, and scraped by on my own, while Emily seemed to glide through life on a golden cushion. And yet here I was, invisible in the moment that should have felt joyful. I retreated to the kitchen, pretending to grab a glass of water, but really trying to escape the suffocating mix of pride and pain in the living room. My hands trembled as I gripped the counter, staring at my reflection in the window. How had it come to this? Why was my life always measured against hers, and why did my parents' love always seem to come with a price tag? My father appeared behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's just a wedding gift," he said, almost casually. "We've always wanted to help Emily celebrate in a big way. You understand, right?" I wanted to scream. "I'm your daughter too," but the words stuck in my throat. Saying them out loud would have made me sound petty. Instead, I nodded quietly, forcing myself to swallow the bitterness that threatened to pour out. I walked back into the living room and watched as Emily carefully placed the check in a decorative envelope. She glanced at me with an innocent smile, completely unaware of the chasm between us. I hated her for that smile, hated that she could be so blissfully unaware, while I felt like a ghost at my own family's celebration. The rest of the evening was a blur. People toasted, laughed, and congratulated Emily. I sat there, a hollow spectator in a theater of privilege. Each laugh and cheer felt like a personal jab. My parents kept glancing at me occasionally, their eyes soft, almost pitying, and that hurt worse than outright anger. Pity is a poison disguised as affection. Later that night, in the quiet of my bedroom, I allowed myself to finally let the tears come. The betrayal was raw and sharp. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every triumph I had worked for alone felt diminished in the shadow of my sister's new $30,000 cushion. I thought about all the times I had asked for support, for guidance, for acknowledgement, only to be brushed aside. And here they were, showering her with what should have been mine, just because she fit their idea of perfect daughter. I curled up on my bed, hugging a pillow as if it could absorb my anger. I wanted to scream at them, to accuse them of favoritism, of betrayal, of treating me like a second-class child. But I also knew that confrontation wouldn't change anything. They were blinded by their love for Emily, unable to see the consequences of their actions. And so, I let the anger simmer quietly. By the time I drifted into a restless sleep, a thought had planted itself in my mind, quiet, determined, and almost exhilarating. Maybe I didn't need their approval. Maybe I had the power to take my worth into my own hands. For the first time, the fire in my chest wasn't just anger. It was a spark of something else, something dangerous, something that whispered, "If they won't give me what I deserve, I'll create it myself," and that spark would be the beginning of a reckoning they would never see coming. The next morning, the house felt different. Not because Emily had slept off her excitement, or because my parents were back to their usual routines, but because something inside me had shifted. The anger from the night before had solidified into a cold, calculating determination. If they weren't going to recognize my worth, I'd show them that my life, and my success, was my own, and no $30,000 check could overshadow that. I sat at the edge of my bed, my laptop open, scanning my bank account. My eyes lingered on the balance longer than I expected. There it was, the black card my company had issued to me for outstanding performance and creditworthiness. A symbol of success I had earned entirely on my own. While Emily had the luxury of parental support, I had something stronger, independence. And that independence came with power. I ran my fingers over the sleek surface of the card. It felt heavier than its weight in plastic. It carried decades of hard work, late nights, sacrifices, and victories my parents hadn't bothered to notice. I could book the most extravagant experiences, the kind of life they'd always reserved for Emily, without asking for a single cent. For the first time, I realized that their favoritism didn't limit me. It had underestimated me. That realization sparked a thrill I hadn't felt in years. I imagined their faces when they realized that the child they considered less deserving was quietly living a life they couldn't control. A life of freedom, luxury, and undeniable success. And I could do it in a way that would sting them without a word of confrontation, revenge, in its sweetest, most subtle form. Over the next few days, I started quietly making plans. I researched venues, designers, and experiences that Emily could never afford without parental support. I smiled as I imagined surprising the family, not with a fight, not with an argument, but with a silent demonstration of what I had built for myself. Every purchase, every reservation, every indulgence would be a carefully placed reminder. I am just as capable, just as deserving, and my worth is not defined by your favoritism. My parents, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in me. They continued to gush over Emily's wedding plans, showing off the $30,000 they had gifted her as if it were a family triumph. We just want her day to be perfect, my mother said again during dinner, her voice warm with pride. I forced a polite smile, nodding along, but inside I was already plotting. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their generosity. I had my own means, and this time, I would use them to make a statement. The black card became more than just a financial tool. It became a symbol of my autonomy. I thought of the power it represented, the ability to book luxury hotels, organize lavish experiences, and enjoy things that my parents had assumed only Emily could have. The best part, I didn't have to explain myself or ask for permission. Every transaction would be a quiet victory. Every swipe a silent message that I was no longer the overlooked daughter in their family narrative. Late one night, I sat at my desk, sketching out the plan. I would host an event that would subtly eclipse Emily's wedding extravagance, a gesture that was generous yet impossible to ignore. I would make my presence, my accomplishments, and my independence impossible to overlook, and I didn't need their approval, or their money, to do it. My plan was simple, elegant, and undeniably mine. For the first time in years, I felt a rush of excitement that had nothing to do with Emily and everything to do with me. The black card wasn't just a credit tool. It was a weapon of validation, the ticket to self-respect, and a quiet instrument of revenge. I had finally discovered that the pain of favoritism could be transformed into power. I went to bed that night with a smile curling on my lips, the card safe in my wallet. They might have given Emily $30,000, but they had underestimated me, and underestimating me had always been their biggest mistake. Tomorrow the real game would begin, and this time, I would make sure they felt every ounce of what they had denied me, without uttering a single word of complaint. And deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. I had been planning this day for weeks, each detail meticulously calculated. It wasn't about outshining Emily in a petty way. It was about sending a quiet, unforgettable message. If my parents could lavish her with $30,000, I could show them that my achievements, independence, and taste were just as worthy of admiration. And this time, I wouldn't need their approval. I arrived at the luxury hotel I had booked with my black card, the kind of place my parents would never have considered for me. Its marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the staff greeted me with a warmth that whispered exclusivity. I had reserved the penthouse suite overlooking the city skyline, and in my mind, it wasn't just a room. It was a declaration. Every choice, every detail, had been selected to reflect my independence, my success, and my refusal to be invisible. Later that evening, I invited my parents and Emily under the guise of a casual family gathering. They had no idea that I had orchestrated this entire experience myself, or that it dwarfed the lavishness of Emily's wedding preparations. As they arrived, eyes wide with admiration, I could feel the subtle tension in the air. They weren't sure what to expect, but something about my calm, confident demeanor made them instantly uneasy. Dinner was served in a private dining room, and I had arranged for a menu that rivaled any gourmet event Emily's $30 could buy. Each course was perfectly paired, presented with elegance, and accompanied by wines I had chosen personally. My parents couldn't stop praising the arrangements, their excitement tinged with a hint of astonishment. Emily, for her part, seemed slightly out of place, a bit humbled by the scale of my preparation. After the meal, I revealed the small touches that tied the night together: handwritten notes for each family member, a curated playlist of music that held meaning for all of us, and a private balcony ceremony where I invited them to toast not just Emily's accomplishments, but mine as well. I watched as my parents' faces shifted from surprise to a dawning awareness. They were seeing me not as the overlooked daughter, but as someone who had quietly built her own world. The subtle revenge wasn't in extravagance alone. It was in the restraint, the control, the deliberate timing. I didn't flaunt my wealth in a brazen, confrontational way. I didn't shout or accuse. Instead, I let the environment, the attention to detail, and the elegance of the evening speak for me. Every glance, every compliment, every moment of awe was a wordless acknowledgement of what I had achieved on my own. Emily, for the first time, looked at me not as a sibling to be spoiled, but as someone formidable, capable, and independent. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she wasn't the only one who could command attention or admiration. It was satisfying, yes, but also bittersweet, because it underscored years of neglect and favoritism. Still, I allowed myself a quiet smile. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about validation for me and only me. Later, as the evening drew to a close, my parents tried to praise Emily for her big day, but their words stumbled. I had already claimed my place in their awareness, not through argument, not through entitlement, but through proof. And there was nothing they could say to diminish it. The $30 check for Emily suddenly felt inconsequential, a symbol of favoritism rendered meaningless by my achievements. As I walked them to the door, I felt a calm, almost triumphant satisfaction. I had achieved what words could never convey. They had seen me fully and undeniably for the first time. The power of my black card wasn't in the money it represented. It was in the independence, the subtlety, and the control it gave me over my own life and my own narrative. That night, after everyone had left, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The glow reflected my own sense of accomplishment. I had exacted my revenge not through cruelty, but through self-realization, elegance, and quiet dominance. And the truth settled over me like a warm cloak. I didn't need their validation anymore. I was seen. I was respected. I had won. And yet, deep inside, I knew that the most important part of this journey was still ahead. It wasn't about outdoing Emily, or even proving a point to my parents. It was about accepting that I didn't need them to define my worth. That lesson, as powerful as the night had been, would be my final victory. The morning after the event, the house felt quieter. I woke up to sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor, a serene contrast to the whirlwind of the past weeks. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible, overlooked, or unappreciated. My parents and Emily had seen a side of me they couldn't ignore, and the subtle shift in our dynamic was palpable. But it wasn't their acknowledgement that mattered anymore. It was the realization that I had finally claimed my own worth. Over breakfast, I noticed the tension in my parents' expressions. They had been trying to discuss Emily's wedding, their voices tinged with excitement, but there was an underlying caution now, an unspoken acknowledgement that their usual favoritism could no longer define our family interactions. Emily, who had once been the center of attention by default, looked at me with a newfound respect, tempered by humility. It wasn't arrogance or superiority I wanted to convey. It was equality, and I had achieved it without raising my voice or demanding recognition. I poured myself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth between my hands, and reflected on everything that had led me here. The years of quiet sacrifices, the late nights working on projects nobody noticed, the moments of longing for my parents' approval. All of it had been painful, but it had shaped me. I realized that my resentment, while intense, had been a catalyst. It forced me to confront the disparity in how I was valued, and pushed me to cultivate independence that my sister would never need to learn. It was a strange kind of relief, the way I felt. I no longer needed to compete for attention or validation. I didn't need a check, a gift, or a grand gesture from my parents to affirm my worth. I had already built a life that reflected my values, my effort, and my accomplishments, and in doing so, I had discovered something far more powerful than monetary gifts: self-respect, autonomy, and inner peace. Later that day, Emily approached me. I could see the mixture of admiration and vulnerability in her eyes, as if she was beginning to understand the years of neglect I had endured, not just financially, but emotionally. "I didn't realize," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't know it was like that for you." I smiled, not with condescension, but with understanding. "It wasn't about her," I said, gesturing vaguely toward our parents. "It was about me realizing I didn't need anyone else to decide my worth." Emily nodded slowly, and for the first time we connected, not as a favored sister and the overlooked one, but as equals. That moment of empathy was more satisfying than any display of wealth, any luxurious event, any black card victory. By evening, my parents had begun to adjust their expectations. Their glances carried a mix of admiration and a subtle sense of guilt, as if they were aware that their favoritism had been exposed, not through conflict, but through proof of my independence. They didn't apologize outright, but the tension had shifted. It was as if they finally recognized that their love, while flawed, wasn't the only measure of a child's success. I spent the rest of the day in quiet reflection, walking through the city streets near my apartment, the black card safely tucked away in my wallet. I realized that revenge, when executed through self-empowerment rather than bitterness, was deeply satisfying. It wasn't about shaming my parents or overshadowing Emily. It was about reclaiming my narrative, proving to myself that I could create my own life on my own terms. That night, I returned home, feeling lighter than I had in years. I understood that my parents' favoritism didn't define me. My sister's wedding, their gifts, their approval, all of it had been beside the point. What mattered was that I had taken control of my destiny, and in doing so, I had discovered the true power of independence. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a profound sense of closure. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't seeking vengeance anymore. I had achieved something far greater: self-realization, emotional freedom, and the knowledge that my life, my happiness, and my worth were entirely mine to define. And in that quiet triumph, I smiled because finally, after years of feeling unseen, I was fully, undeniably, and unapologetically visible.